Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. Some guests' names I just love saying. Cillian O'Connor. And when they hear you talk, the accent will give everything away. The name is a good predictor of the accent. You have a master's in strength and conditioning, obviously a strength coach, the host of the Philosophy of Strength podcast. I was lucky enough to be a guest a while back. We share a lot of taste in heavy metal. I love it when you use Caius on posts. That makes me very happy. For people who know who Caius are, wonderful. If you don't, I'm very sorry. If you're familiar with Queens of the Stone Age, well, Josh Homme used to be in Caius. They're a heavier version of them. So glorious stuff. It's great to have you, my friend.
Thank you very much for having me, and I couldn't agree more. I love a bit of Caius and Queens of the Stone Age, two of my favorite bands.
And I get to see Queens of Stone Age this summer. They're coming to town.
So am I. They're playing and they're supporting System of a Down in London in July, and that'll be my third or fourth time seeing them. So I'm pumped for that as well.
I was at their concert here in Edmonton a year and a half ago. Canceled 20 minutes before they went on the stage. I was there. I had the t-shirt literally, and then got canceled. And I was like, oh shit.
Wow. Was he sick or something? Or
I think he's sick. He's had health issues. So
yeah. Geez, that sucks. One of the best live shows I've been to though, so I'm pumped for it.
I look forward. Okay. Let's get into some of the fun stuff. So first things I want to ask you, I like this. Strength programs only work if you can repeat them. A lot of plans are built for an imaginary week where nothing goes wrong, and that's why they fail. Break it down.
Yeah, so I guess this is something that I see over and over again with people, and I think it's just an understandable desire to want to optimize things or do the perfect thing, what sounds ideal. We all want to kind of imagine that we can jump into something that's going to be really challenging. I think it's part of like the that narrative, like the hero arc story that we're all used to, that we have to do something really hard to start making a change. And it just fails for people a lot. So it's people trying to jump into doing things like, I'm not doing any strength training, so I'm going to start with 5 days a week. Or my diet is terrible, so I'm just going to cut out everything that includes sugar and just eat vegetables and lean protein. It sounds great in theory. I think the problem is people make these decisions when they're at a abnormal amount of motivation. It's like the New Year's resolution phenomenon. I think people do themselves a disservice because they don't think about future me in really just like 2 or 3 weeks' time is probably going to have a stressful week where work doesn't go according to plan, family stuff pops up, and all of a sudden you start missing sessions and it becomes negative reinforcement. So I always start people off with like, what can you do on a stressful week, on a less than ideal week? And oftentimes that ends up being something like only, in quotation marks, 2 sessions a week. But if people do it consistently, they make amazing progress. So I've consistently seen that consistency is the most important thing for the vast majority of people, starting off, certainly.
One of the things I was going to ask you about, but I think it's a good place to drop it in, is it sounds like it's a good way to generate proof of success, like self-efficacy.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think, using myself as an example, I was picked last for every single sport that I ever did. I think I probably held the school record for getting hit in the face with a football the most times. Just was terrible at sports. And as a result, I had it in my head that I just couldn't be a fit, healthy person because my experience of trying to do physical stuff was negative. I got told that I was bad at it. I got picked last. And I think the same thing can happen if every time you try to get started with strength training, you pick a plan that sets you up for failure. And it kind of creates this self-fulfilling prophecy in your head that I can't do this because I'm not able to do it perfectly. One of the most important things that I try to do with people and I stress that they do with their plan is, set themselves up for success. Try to set a plan up so that you can stack so many wins in a row that it's just kind of natural for you to start feeling like, I am a person who goes to the gym and this is a part of my life and I am getting stronger. I see the self-efficacy and the change in identity thing as such a huge part of what I do with people, certainly.
It's a lever I like to pull on too now. You reminded me of something. I've said this before, so listeners, if you've heard me say it before, I apologize, but I have a big theory. I think a lot of people, whether consciously or subconsciously, and oftentimes it'll manifest around the New Year's resolution behavior, is they set themselves up not to be successful, but to fail, to prove, to generate proof that they are not the sort of person who can do this. And
Yeah.
with that comes the unsustainable ideal, the I will work out the 5 or 6 times a week. I will never have sugar again. I will never drink alcohol again.
Yeah.
Because I think what underpins this, we all have this noisy anxiety, self-doubt, discomfort with the things that we don't like about ourselves. I think in the general population, and I think marketing, I think media can reinforce this, but I think people generally know I don't feel good about my body image. I don't feel good about my weight. And I
Hmm.
think there's one section of this that I've always been kind of vocal about, is I think there are voices that downplay the risks, the metabolic health risks of being overweight, of being sedentary, etc.
Hmm.
And it's usually kind of more of a performative, empathetic. I usually find that the messaging there is actually kind of a narcissistic thing, but that's a side quest. People who know me know I talk about this a fair bit. I just think those people are bad faith actors who are victimizing vulnerable people to begin with. But I think
Yeah.
oftentimes from within, people have this strong identity. Hey, I'm not the sort of person who do this. So they set themselves up with something that they know they'll fail at.
Yeah.
4, 6 weeks later, see, I tried. I proved that I am not the kind of person rooted in identity that can do this, which soothes the emotional discomfort that was creeping up. But what ends up happening? It settled for a bit. It starts to build, 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 build. You haven't actually fundamentally changed anything,
Mm.
gain more weight, etc., until that cycle comes around again. And I think that New Year's is the trigger that says, all right, I'm going to make another demonstration to try this again. I think the
Mm.
plan's wrong. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think there's a safety in starting with something that you know deep down is never going to be sustainable. There's very few people who are ever going to start with some crazy high intense workout plan that you have to do every single day and that actually is the thing that they stick with. But I think what's hard about it is that it's that kind of like cheesy saying. It's phrased in loads of different ways, but the essential point of it is like you'll change when the pain that you're experiencing by staying the same is clearly more pain than you could expect to have by changing, and a lot of people just you have to reach that point where you're just so fed up and so sick of being in that spot of either being overweight, unfit, weak, the mental health issues that can come with that. And maybe you've had to try enough of the flashy stuff and fail at it over and over again that finally you're ready. Like, I mean, the stuff that I do with people is so unsexy, and as a result, I have very rarely had people who have never tried at least one other thing before coming to me.
Mhm.
I had a very good um, personal trainer slash strength coach on my own podcast a year or two ago. His name is Will Walsh. He's also an Irishman, and I was kind of talking about how frustrating it is, like these people that sell these quick fixes in New Year's. And he kind of made the point that I hadn't thought about before, that like, yeah, but a lot of people are just always going to have to go through that first. It's like it's
Mhm.
very hard to expect somebody who doesn't know as much about fitness as a personal trainer does to have what's seemingly a quick fix dangled in front of them. And then the alternative option is, long-term sustainable habit changes, and expect them not to go for the first thing. And it sometimes that sets people up for being open to the idea of doing something that's going to be sustainable and a little bit more grounded in changing your habits as opposed to just slapping a method onto something. So yeah, I fully agree. It's difficult. Like somebody has to get to that point themselves first.
A few thoughts there. One, uh, of many of my most successful long-term clients,
Hmm.
I would think virtually all of them have tried the false starts and those things first before they got
Yeah.
to a place where they were ready. Uh, Yeah, I would love it in a perfect world that everybody who needs it would find the good evidence-based, empathetic stuff that works first. But to your point, I think too, um, it is a good reason for us as an industry to be thoughtful about our messaging. And sometimes the messaging can be condescending and belittling for people for falling for the
Yeah.
marketing, the carefully curated stories and narratives. And so I think we're wise to be a little cautious there, to remember that it's not as common sense as it is to us who are the deeply indoctrinated and been living in this world for a really long time.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's very, very easy to forget that you are in a bubble of information that is not going to be the first point of contact for most people when they look up fitness stuff. It's, I've started doing some in-person group coaching again recently with people who are completely green to training. And it's been so good for just giving me that reminder of, how little people really know about stuff when they're starting off, not understanding things that might seem obvious in terms of, you need to make the exercises harder over time. Strength training isn't going to make you balloon into a massive muscle just because you started off doing it once or twice a week. And I think when you hear that stuff over and over again so much and you're exposed to better information, it's very easy to take for granted, like, ah, yeah, it's crap, nobody believes that. But that is what a large percentage of people are thinking about when they're starting off. It's the stuff that's very easy to take for granted. So yeah, I agree. I've tried to do that with my messaging in terms of like not assume people have the understanding that a coach has with stuff and bring it back down to like what is going to be practical and actionable for somebody who really needs help with getting started with training.
You said change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. But does that guarantee, do people bounce when they hit rock bottom automatically?
Do they what when they hit rock bottom?
Do they bounce when they hit rock bottom?
As in, do they, reliably make a sustainable change?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Like, I think there's a window that opens. I think about like I was saying to you, I was not somebody who was naturally inclined in any way towards sports or exercise. And it's interesting for me to think back to like maybe I was very lucky that I started when I did. I think that for a lot of people, what really happens is like there's a narrow window that opens every now and then where you're open to change.
Mm.
And it might be the case that you need to be in an environment where it's conducive to that happening. You need to be in a time in your life or surrounded with certain people where it's conducive to that happening. And like the more time goes on, the more I realize how extremely privileged and lucky that I was that, I basically got into this stuff through going to a school where I had a fantastic strength coach slash PE teacher, this guy, David Jones, really well respected coach in Ireland who gave up his time after school to let us come down to basically do like kind of CrossFit slash GPP type classes. And if I didn't have that opportunity, who knows if I ever would have gotten into training. So I think that it's not a guarantee that just because somebody is in a state where they're
Mm.
like wanting to make a change that it's going to happen. I think there has to be the right combination of things that align at the right time.
Ooh, yes. Funny what you just described. Have you read the classic essay Iron and the Soul by Henry Rollins?
I think I've probably seen excerpts from it.
Oh, it's one of the best pieces of fitness writing. It's goes back a long time. So the actor musician Henry Rollins,
Yeah,
but he details. I think there was a teacher that
yeah,
helped teach him some of the stuff very early in life. And there's a bunch of quotes that I probably bastardized, but one of them is, I think it's friends will come and something will come and go, but 200 pounds is always 200 pounds. Anyway, there's a lot of beautiful stuff in this essay. I recommend anybody just search it. It's easily found on the internet, Iron and the Soul. Uh, but I often think the idea that like rock bottom is where you need to go in order to
yeah.
like
Don't get me wrong, if you can avoid hitting rock bottom, it would be
that's
ideal.
that's my logic and my
Yeah,
my thoughts are you look at a lot of the people who, sometimes through no fault of their own, but like just society has failed them. They've gotten into, terrible situations, which has resulted in very bad outcomes. They found levels below rock bottom.
Mhm. Yeah.
So and the deeper you get to rock bottom, the more disadvantages you've stacked up to make it harder. The deeper the hole you've dug for yourself. So I
Yeah.
don't like the narrative of waiting for it. It's just my thought.
No, I mean, absolutely, and I agree. And it does get harder. Even though I have worked with lots of people who are older and had never done any strength training before, it is absolutely harder for them, I have found, to get started. If you wait until you're in your 50s, 60s and above, you can absolutely still do it, but you're working against decades of, a sedentary lifestyle, habits that have really become ingrained. I think like especially if there's any parents listening, if you ever want to do anything to set your kids up for success, giving them the resources to be able to discover some kind of form of physical fitness or exercise that they actually love and enjoy doing, God, it makes things so much easier for people in the long term.
And my parents were wonderful for this. I've said in numerous places, they're ahead of the curve. They got us involved in cross-country skiing. And funny, in this tiny little northern Newfoundland town, there was a couple who were later went on to be nationally recognized cross-country skiing coaches. And
Yeah.
this little community was one of the best hotspots for cross-country skiing athletes in Newfoundland. Many went on to the national level. I quit. Oh, I was about 13, but I won provincial medals in it. But my
Mm.
parents, my dad bought me a weight bench when I was in my teens. They encouraged us to swim. They were both elite swimmers. I never took to swimming. There was all sorts of other stuff, healthy nutrition. But me and my brothers, we played, well, me and my middle brother, I'm the oldest, we played every sport imaginable. We played high school basketball. My mom was a teacher, and she would stay for a couple hours after school just to let us use the gymnasium because there wasn't even always someone who could coach us. So we were
Mm.
a self-coached team, and we played very well in that region.
Yeah, and
Big
I mean,
advantages.
it is a huge advantage. It does something from a physiological standpoint, definitely. Like I've noticed that because I used to work in a school. It was some of the most enjoyable coaching that I've done before was working with kids age sort of 12 through to 18. And it was very easy to just be able to pick out the kids who had been engaged in some kind of sport or exercise from the time that they were young. They came in and they were able to pick things up faster. They were able to get into good positions for doing a body weight squat. And then on the flip side, there was kids who hadn't done anything and had probably done a lot of, say, like sitting on a couch with an iPad, gaming or whatever, and could not do a body weight squat. And
Mm.
they weren't particularly overweight or anything like that. There just was a severe lack of general physical fitness. Um, and so that's one of the things that I would love to see. It's a big problem to solve, but if physical fitness could become a greater part of kind of the infrastructure of society and it could be integrated back into life a lot more, I think it's probably one of the biggest things that could have a significant impact on like a population level for health.
And I didn't think about it growing up, but now I see the parents that I coach and
Yeah.
they're getting their kids involved in hell, things like jujitsu,
Yeah.
all kinds of sports. And soccer made me think. So, of course, you being in Ireland, and you say you got a football in the face. A lot of people are probably thinking of pigskin and American football. No, that's a
Yeah.
soccer ball to us, right?
Soccer ball. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it's correctly a football. I get it, right? We just,
Yeah. Well, the biggest, actually, I mean, like football or soccer is popular here, but in terms of what we actually excel at, our rugby team really punches
mm.
very far above its weight, and has become very good in the last sort of 5 to 10 years or so. But then there's national sports as well, like Gaelic football and hurling and things like that.
I've got to, I got to get Nick Winkelman back at some point because he's
Oh
been
yeah.
involved with Irish Rugby Union now for quite a while, right? He's a legendary strength coach.
Yes. Yeah, actually I had the pleasure of being able to see him present They basically had this kind of Leinster. So Leinster is the province that I live in Ireland. You've got Leinster, Connacht, Ulster, Munster. So Leinster is in the eastern region where Dublin is,
Mm.
and so they kind of have like a network for strength coaches that are involved in coaching the S&C at the school level for rugby. And they had a conference that he presented at, and it was really fantastic. Just some of the stuff he was talking about with things like skill acquisition and stuff like that.
Little known fact, my mother was born in Dublin, so I'm actually an Irish citizen. I have a
That's
EU
a
passport.
it's
Yep.
one of the most powerful passports to have in terms of being
Mm.
able to get into places without any hassle.
Yeah, I haven't taken advantage of it yet, but yes, the dual Canadian Irish citizenship goes a long way, right?
Yeah.
I'll interrupt this episode for a quick but important side quest. While I don't think everybody needs to track nutrition all the time, tracking is one of the most powerful tools to make sure you're not eating too much or too little. And Macros First is my go-to app for me and my clients. Macros First has a free barcode scanner, and a premium version comes with a bunch of cool stuff to make managing your nutrition easier. Like, one, AI search. AI is everywhere now, where you can speak or type the foods you wish to save and log everything without having to search for each individual ingredient. Two, import recipes from a website. Save time creating recipes manually by importing all ingredients and instructions from your favorite recipe websites. No more searching for each ingredient one by one, just paste in the website. And three, and this one's a big one for nutrition coaches, follow unlimited friends so you can follow all your clients. And there's a lot more cool features. You can try the premium version of Macros First free for 14 days. Just download Macros First from the App Store. And during setup, you'll be asked, how did you hear about us? Type in the code, Andrew.
Let's get a bit granular. Yeah, let's get a bit granular. So I'd love to
Sure.
see some of the more specific ways that people are probably overly focused on this optimizing, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
and that's ultimately holding them back. Are we talking about changing programs too often? The worry about like the perfect program split. What's going on? What do you see?
Um, yeah, so I think, the internet has helped and hindered people at the same time
Mm.
because, I think if you probably wound the clock back 30, 35 years, if you were to tell people in a gym at that point that, there is going to be this thing called YouTube where you will be able to search anything you want. You'll have hundreds of demos of how to do a squat with like movie level production and cameras and everything. It all sounds great, but I think the problem is that it's not the limiting factor. Like the limiting factor for people, once you've learned the very basic stuff about should be doing strength training, should be doing, mostly multi-joint exercises, squatting, pushing, pulling, etc. At like past that point, the limiting factor for most people is no longer getting finer details than that. And I think the big problem that we have with fitness or strength and conditioning as a whole in terms of how information is presented online is that we basically have these two things that are conflicting with each other. So there's an algorithm that rewards novelty and it rewards hot takes, things that you're not going to hear repeated over and over again.
Mm.
And there's an assumption that if something is new or a spicy take, that it has more value than something that's been said over and over again. So that's one side of it. And then the other side of it is that people are basically coming at this information with no real understanding of where the hierarchy is.
Mm.
And I think that is like the other major problem that kind of is at the root of maybe a lot of arguments that happen online about, whether it's good to focus on, the angle of pull on some cable exercise or whether you do 12 reps or 15 reps. I think what misses the mark with these things is that it's not that this stuff doesn't matter or can't matter at all. I think you can make an argument for anything mattering given the right person and the right context. But there isn't an understanding of any amount of energy and time that you spend focusing on one thing is probably taking away from something else. And what I see
Mm.
with a lot of people is that if you were to kind of like, I don't know, give them a grade from like A to F or something like that on how well they're performing and the big important things for getting stronger, fitter, healthier. There's a lot of people who are at like a D level in terms of their consistency, their nutrition, their sleep, their effort, and they're trying to get an A in picking the perfect exercise. And it's not that getting an A in that doesn't matter, but it definitely doesn't matter until you get the grades and everything else up to at least a B or something like that. And the problem is the algorithm just doesn't reward that message because it's very boring and it's just telling people to basically think less about all of this stuff and execute. Um, yeah, so that's kind of my thoughts on it. I just think the platforms of things like Instagram, YouTube, they can be fantastic resources of knowledge, but the paradox of it is you almost need to know the answer to be able to parse out what's good and bad information.
It makes me think of elite bodybuilders. So anybody who's plugged into, the history of bodybuilding, you'll
Mm.
see wildly different presentations of camps and ideologies. Uh, Obviously, there's people who get very wrapped up in Mike Menser stuff now.
Yeah,
There may be some listeners who might not like hearing this, but the way that Mike Menser built his physique based on a lot of the people around at the time was the more traditional bodybuilding building style of his era, the Arnold style. And then he later branded around a different approach, a more lower volume, higher intensity approach that was often signified by Dorian Yates. So a lot of people
Mhm.
attribute that. And Mike had a world-class physique. So what you have with these elite bodybuilders is anytime someone uses an elite bodybuilder in any example, you have to bake in, for their era, probably cutting edge performance enhancing drug use.
Yeah,
You're dealing with the genetic elite, the hyper responders of that space. And then what is the concurrent thing that they all generally did fairly well? They all pretty much trained with great intensity. Now, Lee Haney, who's a many time, 7 or 8 time Mr. Olympia, I can't remember exactly.
Mm.
He would say stimulate, don't annihilate. He wasn't a big proponent of like doing heavy lifts like deadlifts. Uh, Obviously, Ronnie Coleman's one of the greatest of all time, and Ronnie would compound exercises like an absolute madman. Now, also, what are we seeing in snippets of video? Is that representative of all their training? I think in Ronnie's case, yes. And then people
yeah,
will turn around and say, well, Ronnie's like literally broken and assume that the way he trained is causal there. And
yeah,
Ronnie's greatest rival, Jay Cutler, strong as hell, but seemed to be known for using a lot of machine-based training too. And so it doesn't matter who you pick. There's different ideas and ideologies.
yeah,
But I think what runs under concurrent to all of it, there's the drugs, there's, probably great nutrition and recovery, or certainly more than enough of it.
yeah,
But there's good training volume and intensity and that intersection of training hard with
yeah,
enough volume that they responded really well to it. And again, there's the shape of the icons. Arnold, you look at his chest and his biceps and his small waist of his era. Those are very genetically predisposed,
yeah.
even though you magnify muscle growth on top of them. And a he looked like a pro bodybuilder as a teenager. A good friend of mine growing up in Newfoundland is Frank McGrath, who is fairly well known in bodybuilding circles. He's got an iconic physique, famous for his forearms. Frank in university as a 20-year-old looked like a pro bodybuilder.
Mhm. Yeah. Are you familiar with there's a great story that I think kind of sums up the kind of logical fallacy that people make when they're looking at elite bodybuilders or elite people in any endeavor as the way to parse out what definitely works and what definitely doesn't work. And it's the story about the Allied fighter pilots' planes when they were trying to figure out where to reinforce it with armor. You familiar
Share
with
it.
this story?
Absolutely. I know Brian Cron posts about it sometimes.
Yeah,
But
I think
yes,
it's
tell it.
fantastic. So, I might get some of the details wrong, but essentially, I think this is World War II, they wanted to improve the durability of the planes, But, anytime that you do that, there's a trade-off in the range that you get because you're making the plane heavier. So they needed to basically pick what are going to be the most important areas for us to reinforce, to be able to protect the pilots, make sure it doesn't get shot out of the air. And so what they started doing was they looked at planes that returned from combat and they looked at where are the bullet holes, where are these planes getting shot at? And sounds really logical. You're saying, okay, there's bullet holes in the wings and in the tail wing. That's where it's getting shot. So that's where we need to reinforce the armor. And then there was a mathematician, I think from like Columbia University or something, and he came along and said, actually, you're doing this completely backwards because you'll notice that there's no planes returning with bullet holes in the cockpit or in the fuselage that could explode. And the reason you're not seeing that is because those planes never made it back from combat because the people died. So you're actually looking at the completely wrong sample. You're looking at where can planes afford to get shot and still survive and make it back to base. And that is basically the big mistake people make when they're looking at elite people, especially if you're looking at just a single person, like just Ronnie Coleman or just some other elite bodybuilder, because you're assuming that every single thing they did was the right way to make it to the elite level. How many people trained like Ronnie Coleman did and didn't get to that level because they got injured or they didn't have the genetics for it or whatever? So what I think people should be looking at instead is what is the stuff that everybody seems to have to do? Like what is the stuff that you can't afford to not observe as a principle or a law? And I think what's interesting about that is when you do that, you realize there's really not a lot of stuff that you need to tick off, and there's a lot of room for variation and individualization. Like you were saying, it kind of comes down to like doing strength training, doing it at enough of an intensity consistently enough. And I think one of the big ones that you'll notice about people who are successful is they put themselves in an environment that is conducive to them um, making great results. Like if it was a priority for me and I was like, my number one goal, do or die by the end of the year, is to get my squat, bench, deadlift as high as possible. The first thing I would do is I would sign up to join a powerlifting club tomorrow. There's a powerlifting club in Dublin that is like, they win all the competitions. And regardless, if I just put myself in that environment, I'm going to get stronger because I'm going to be surrounded by people who are going to raise the bar of what I expect from myself. I'm going to observe what they do better than me, and I'm going to start doing it. I'm probably going to work harder on my nutrition and sleep subconsciously. So that I think is what people don't really take into consideration when they're trying to look at like what's the right thing to do? Like what does everybody have to do? And what could you do that would make it almost unlikely that you wouldn't succeed?
Survivorship bias. It's one of the most important.
That's the term.
Yep. It's one of the most important things I look at almost anything. Uh, uh, Healthy user bias, a little different, but that's also something I always look at whenever it comes to like big fitness topics. But survivorship bias is one of the most essential concepts in all this stuff. Let's do the
Sorry,
training.
one thing, not to cut across
please.
you, one thing I'd add to that, what I think is ironic, nothing taught me more about what is like absolutely vital for making progress in strength training than when I trained people who were very old and very frail.
Mm.
Because you have to do everything right with them, or they'll get hurt, or they'll stop making progress. You will learn so much more from getting somebody in their 70s who's never trained before strong than somebody who's just a genetic freak and they touch a weight and they just get strong.
I've got my friend Robert Linkle coming back on the podcast very soon. Depends on the order of these episodes. We'll see. It might have already been out, but he specializes in this. He's fantastic. If anybody's interested in that.
Yeah.
Does training split matter? I think you've already answered this in a roundabout way, but I think there's a lot of argument about training split. So I'd love to hear your take.
So, as in if you do full body, upper,
Yeah.
lower, bro split,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yes.
I think it matters in the sense, I think it matters in a practical sense. So I don't think it matters in the sense of like there's so many examples of people, certainly when we're talking about gaining muscle, who've
Mm,
succeeded with pretty much every split imaginable.
mm,
Um, like I'm not even, and it kind of kills me to say because like just my bias is I'm not a fan of the bro split.
Mm,
Um, I think because I started off with like such a performance slant to training, so I'm used to things like full body and upper lower training. But it would actually be, I think it would be inaccurate of me to say that, somebody is going to get like radically different results by doing a bro split, 5 or 6 days a week versus 4 days of upper lower. I would be interested to see a study done on that,
mm,
but my heart tells me that it's probably not true if they're doing all the big stuff.
mm,
But I have noticed that some splits lend themselves better to people being able to be consistent.
mm,
So if somebody, if somebody is a regular person where like the gym is not in their top three priorities in life, their priorities are family, job, and maybe some other hobby or something outside of that, or
mm,
friends or whatever, more than likely that person is really only going to have 2, 3, maybe maximum 4 days a week that they could actually train consistently for months at a time. And a bro split doesn't lend itself well to that. It's just not a lot of frequency for the major muscle groups.
mm.
If it was, something that, say I was going to coach somebody and that was like so much more enjoyable for them, I'd just be like, okay, screw it, do the bro split. I don't care. As long as you do it consistently, it's good. But I have found over and over again that basically full body or an upper lower split
Mm.
it tends to set people up for success for people who actually are a bit stretched with their time and want to be able to do stuff consistently and not spend all day in the gym.
Agree completely. Most of my clients do full body workouts of some kind. I like upper
Yeah.
lower splits again. And to your point, I think the frequency that someone can train during the week is probably the biggest factor in your choice. Fewer opportunities to train, full body is the best approach.
Yeah.
As you get into kind of four or more, I find upper lower alternating works really well. I find a rotating push pull leg split works really well.
Mhm.
And then if you got someone like historically, again, I'm an anecdote and there's a lot of uniqueness to me, but when I started getting really serious about the gym, finally at 24 years of age, I probably went to the gym, I think 5 days a week on a bro split. I'd probably skip my legs half the time, but I went from 170 pounds to 210 pounds in 7 months drug free. Okay.
Yeah.
Have my nutrition dialed in. Now, again, there's genetics involved in there, probably been, probably blessed on that front, but I've more or less for many, many years trained some modification of a bro split between 5 and 7 days a week. I'm probably closer to 5 days the last year or so. And
Mhm.
it's probably a modified, it's almost more like a modified push pull legs, but it's still broken up more. But guess what? I like being at the gym. I make the time in my life to actually do the greater amount of volume, which lends itself better to more of a split up thing. But I'm not the norm.
Yeah, and like I'm a big believer that all these splits they kind of balance each other out. And
Mm,
so like because if you're going to do a bro split and you're only let's say you're only training your chest once a week, okay, a lot of the hypertrophy research would indicate maybe hitting chests 2 times a week or more
mm,
should be more optimal, but you're also like you're getting a lot of volume in one workout for your chest that somebody on an upper lower split would just split over 2 days. So it's pretty conceivable that it kind of balances out because okay, I'm only doing it once a week, but it's a really strong stimulus of once a week. Um, and but I also do think that people are I think, the fitness industry definitely goes in trends, and I think there is, just from what I've observed in like discourse online and comment sections, and certainly posts I've put up that people have pushed back against, I think there's a pretty strong bias against the idea of less is more at the moment. And I mean, uh, I've just seen so many
mm,
examples of people doing like I was at a seminar that I was speaking at a few months ago and there was a really strong guy who was also a coach that was speaking, and he was just kind of laughing. Somebody asked a question about like, surely 3 days isn't enough
mm,
or whatever. And he was like, I do 3 days. And like I'm stronger than 90% of people in the
mm.
gym. I just make sure when I'm in on those 3 days that I'm working hard. And when I'm not in the gym, I'm doing a really good job with my nutrition and my sleep. I trained a guy from Greece recently who was only training 2 days a week. The guy benched 140 kilos for 5 reps on 2 days a week of full body training. I've just seen so many examples of people manage to extract a lot out of what might seem like not a lot of time in the gym per week, but I think you can balance it out if you're dialed in when you're in there and you do a really good job on the recovery front as well.
I do wonder if the people who are pretty elite, who are
Mhm.
now doing, maybe fewer days, if they'd actually built that foundation of strength and muscle with
Mhm.
more frequency, more volume in the earlier days. I've definitely seen proponents of this lower volume training who we know that used to train a lot more, built the muscle that way. And I recently had my friend Nick Shaw on the podcast, and we talked about this particular topic. It is much easier to maintain or to target make improvements on certain
Yeah.
feet on certain training qualities uh, on lower amounts of volume than it was to build it initially.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And actually, I think I another like major advantage that I had starting off was that, because I started off training in a school, I went to the gym every single day, Monday
Mm.
through Friday, and it was very high. It was basically CrossFit style workouts, and this was kind of like CrossFit in its peak era of like 2009 or so, 2010, 2011. So, my introduction to training, S&C coaches will kind of debate about like, should teenagers be doing workouts with, cleans and whatever, but it was pretty much what most people would advocate for kids, which is general physical preparedness. It was boatloads of push-ups, farmers carries, tire flips, running with a Bulgarian bag on my back, pull-ups. And myself and my friends who have gone on to say like try to do other sports or stuff like that, we've always felt like that definitely served us. Like getting exposure to a lot of tolerable volume across like a broad range of different exercises that built our muscle mass, built our cardiovascular fitness, gave us this base of fitness that's quite easy to maintain as you go on then.
All right, let's get a little bit more tactical when it comes to full body training, because this is a quote from you. Full body training is not 8 exercises per muscle group, a 2 hour session, training everything to failure. It's 3 to 5 solid movements done well. Do you want to unpack that?
Yeah. So, this definitely is in relation to the type of people that I tend to train who are usually like busy professionals, really can't afford to be in the gym for longer than about an hour maximum. And I think, like I said, like different splits bring different things to the table and they kind of balance each other out. So if you take the polar opposite of a full body split, which is like the bro
Mm.
split, um, you're balancing the fact that you're only training the muscle group probably once a week by the fact that you're going to do maybe 5 or 6 different exercises just for that muscle group in one session. Full body means that you've now made the trade-off of, okay, I'm going to be able to hit things at a higher frequency, but the trade for that is I can't have loads of different exercises. There has to be bang for buck in there. I'm probably going to focus more on full body multi-joint movements as opposed to loads of things like bicep curls, tricep extensions, sit-ups. Don't get me wrong, I still include those in programs,
Mm.
but there has to be a balance. So yeah, basically a full body session, the way that I set it up, typically there's going to be one main lower body exercise that's either going to be a squat or some kind of a hinge like a deadlift or an RDL. One main pushing exercise, bench press, overhead press, push up, dumbbell pushing movement. One main pulling exercise could be a pull up, a row, lat pull down. Um, and then everything after that is kind of as time and energy allows and as our focus dictates. And I think
Mm.
that's the big thing with full body training and really planning training in general as people get a little bit more experienced with it. I'm a big fan of Jim Wendler,
Mm.
and he is very good, I think, at teaching this point that training has to have balance, and you can't chase multiple rabbits at once that are running in the different directions. And so I think the thing that a lot of people struggle with, particularly with full body training, is the idea that not everything can matter all at once. And when you're limited with time and exercise selection, you do have to just accept there are some things that you're not going to get 100% efficiency out of. I haven't trained um, an ab movement, like an ab isolation movement regularly in my program for several months now, because I just haven't been able to justify the time and the energy when I've done everything else. Because my priority right now with my accessories is upper body strength and hypertrophy. So where maybe if you were doing an upper lower split or a bro split, you might have the time to put in a Russian twist or a sit up or whatever. I've been putting in a bicep curl or a lateral raise. And so I think that's a big part of full body training as well, that you kind of have to be a little bit ruthless with, like, if I can't justify absolutely needing to do this right now, I'm just not going to focus on it for now.
That makes a lot of sense. I've worked with people. I got one client, if he's listening, he'll know who I'm talking about. He's a coach and he really wants to do everything in his program, and it's always too much volume. So it's always like a little bit of like it's always Tetris with just the right amount of volume to keep the emotionally soothe it, but also not break him in terms
the problem
of
is coaches are so good at being able to justify everything, because they know so much. So you can always justify, oh, just put this in as well, and just to target this thing. But yeah, you really do. It's a hard one. It took me a long time to grasp this idea until I saw other people succeeding by doing less. And then I was like, okay, there was one point where I made the most progress I've ever made in my lifts. It was actually during the lockdowns. And I was training with two friends who were a lot stronger than me. Like, we're talking, one of the guys was like, his warm up on bench press was like my working set weight on squats. And I'm looking at these guys just focus on, every session we just do squat, bench press, pull-ups, and then at the end, if there's time, we do curls. Obviously, I'm not saying that's what everybody should do, but as somebody at the time who was thinking, I have to be doing single leg work, and then there also needs to be some core in there, and then I need to be targeting my rear delts, it was good for kind of just like snapping me into focus that, like, okay, clearly not everything matters as much as everything else.
Was being around, it's a proverb about, if you're the strongest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Was it partly just being around some just elite strong people that motivated you? You showed up and you worked?
100%. Like, it's so vital. I mean, like, I have even found it that maybe it just like particularly affects me, but like, if I start training in a gym where I am one over the strongest people in the room, my training without fail starts going worse. So I've tried to, like, it's one of the things actually that might be like the closest thing to a New Year's resolution that I had this year, was to like finally take this lesson on board after having tried so many times to just train by myself and get the same results. I've just been like, screw it, from now on, every Friday I train with my flatmate, who's also a very good coach, Rick Nally. And we train together, and then I occasionally train with other friends as well. And it, like, even if the person isn't miles ahead of you in strength, just having somebody else there beside you just puts things into perspective about how hard am I really working on this. And I think if you have any competitive bone in your body, you're almost always going to do better when somebody else is there next to you.
This episode is brought to you by Just Bite Me Meals. I work long days and I won't compromise my client experience or sacrifice my workout, sleep, or nutrition. So I needed a quality and reliable meal prep service so I could save time on cooking and shopping and have more time for the stuff that matters. Net out the cost of groceries, and the service isn't as much as you might think, and regular impulsive food delivery apps, eating out, that costs way more. Anyway, I get more meal variety and less dishes to clean, and I've been referring clients to Just Bite Me Meals for a long time, and I recently started ordering myself. Food is great. The beef brisket tacos are my favorite so far, and there's a lot of menu choice. Your calories and macros are listed. The portions are great, You can order custom meals, they deliver to your door, or you can pick up from their storefront. And I'm sorry to listeners outside of Alberta, but Just Bite Me Meals is currently just in Edmonton, Calgary, Grand Prairie, and Fort McMurray. Ordering from Just Bite Me Meals made my life easier instantly. And you can get 10% off on all your orders using my code, Andrew Coates Fitness, all caps, on their website. That's Andrew Coates Fitness, all capitals, or go to the link and the code in the show notes. I think, and I can't cite the data off the top of my head, but I know there's research studies that show that people who have a trainer get, better results, and whether they're pushing themselves more, you've got an external eye on, your own subjective experience of how close you are to failure. I'm sure there's something to the frequency and accountability of showing up for it over longer time horizons. That's got to be a big multiplier.
100%. I mean, I don't know if you maybe, I think some people are more clued in or whatever when they start off, but I think because I started from a performance strength and conditioning standpoint with coaching, where I was working with athletes or people who were kind of intrinsically more motivated about this stuff, I was quite green to and naive about just how important accountability is when I started doing personal training with, general public. And honestly, as time has gone on, I tend to think it might be the most important thing that we bring to the table for people. And I think that a lot of coaches don't like that idea because maybe they think it takes away from their intellect or something. But I mean, I as a coach experience the power of accountability as well. There's nothing wrong with that being the most important thing that you bring to the table for somebody, because it's a hard thing to have without somebody else there.
I mean, I think about any of my long-time clients, and many of my clients have been with me for many years. There reaches a point where there's not much cueing or teaching
Yeah.
going on. Uh, a lot of it is the nature of the relationship. We bullshit about stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with training. We
Yeah.
may be going into some tactical nutrition stuff depending on the phase they're in. But for a lot of them, the long-term successful clients also usually proactively understand that this is an important point of accountability for them. For a lot of working professionals, it's, hey, I want to invest in this time commitment for me so that way I can offload the decision making and the thinking because they don't have the bandwidth. And I've had a lot of parents, it's the same sort of thing, right? To force them to show up. But I can understand why coaches always want to feel like, well, I'm contributing because, I'm engineering this particular exercise and we're doing biomechanics this and what have you. And it's like, by and large, being a successful long-term personal trainer, you start out, you have to do those things fairly well to set people up. But over the long horizon with client relationships, that stuff gradually becomes less and less and less important. And it's
Mhm.
all these other things that take over for you to be sustainably successful. And it doesn't diminish. In fact, I think those skills are essential to people getting long-term results because we've all had those clients that knew what to do on their own. They went off on their own, and sometimes they just felt overconfident. Sometimes it's financial resources, sometimes it's other things. But all too often, what did those people end up doing? They got less consistent and they fell off eventually. I am very proud of some of my early clients in my career who've thrived based on the lessons and the skill and the knowledge, and they're very motivated, very driven, very disciplined people. But I've seen an equal number that fell off track and then came back after the fact. I have quite a number of my current clients were former clients who returned sometime
Yeah.
later on because they're in a different phase of life. They're like, I need this baked in with support instead of running it on my own.
Yeah. And also, to that point about um, that's the skill set of accountability or just being able to communicate with people like that. I would think is only going to become more and more important because we're at a stage now where it's still early days of things like AI and stuff like that, but it's not inconceivable that there is going to come a point where it becomes pretty good at being able to give
Mhm.
somebody a good enough program that they're not going to fail as a result of
It's already
doing
there. It's
something short.
already there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I know that there's like some companies that put together some really good apps that do it as well. I know like there's the RP hypertrophy thing and whatever.
I'm sponsored
Um,
by a baby, and it's actually what I use for my own training, and I
yeah,
swear by it. Absolutely,
yeah,
right?
there you go. And there's a lot of people for whom that is all they really need in terms of help. Um, but you know, the skills of being able to actually relate to another human being, to be able to communicate with them, also being able to understand the context of when something might sound good on paper but isn't going to be the right thing to apply to this exact individual. I think those skills are only going to become more valued by people as time goes on. Because I think the gaps that AI is not able to fill are going to become more and more noticeable.
I think absolutely to your point. I've said this in presentations. I genuinely believe that we'll see sort of a divergence in the way that people consume fitness and show for it. Uh, and this will severely affect coaching, in particular online coaching. I think there are a lot of people who will gravitate towards the support of some sort of algorithmic, AI-based, and very high quality and low cost
Yeah.
entity. I mean, I always use RP as an example because their templates were probably better back then, way before this stuff was normal, than a lot of the coaching that's out there right now, right?
Yeah.
And so they're not the only player that's going to be in this space, and there's going to be big money entering this space to develop this stuff, and these will be available at scale. And then
Yeah.
I think on the other side of it, people will self-select to where everything is so algorithmic, is so AI based, that any company that you deal with, they're going to have, AI interfaces that will answer most of your questions. We've already seen that for a while. I mean, you think online banking versus going into the bank and standing in front of the teller. Well, guess what? That makes most of our lives way better. There's occasionally something we need to actually go see a real human for when it comes to our banking, uh, but you see that the older people, who's always in line, what rare time you have to go to the bank. It's
Yeah,
always
it's
somebody
usually
older
70-year-old people or above, and
and they're taking their time, but it might be the little bit of social contact they get during the week, right?
yeah, they
So I
love it.
always
Yeah,
smile and say, hey, I can be patient here.
yeah,
But I genuinely think that in an ever more algorithmic world with all the sort of convenience baked in, I think fitness is going to be one of the places where people self-select to a real human relationship. And what I caution coaches on is if you exist exclusively in the online space and you think that you can systemize, scale, and automate yourself out of actually interacting with real people and yet charge this high ticket price, you're going to get annihilated. That business model will get absolutely annihilated. It's going to be, I think people can do very well with the real human relationship and support online, and people will value it. I think it's going to be a tough place to be. I think you have to be very good with your marketing. It's not necessarily big social media can help, but I think that people are gravitating back to in person. I was thrilled when you said you're going back and doing some in-person group stuff. I'm actually encouraging a lot of the online coaches out there to do more in person. I think it's more stable. I think it's really in demand. It never went away. We just had a blip there
yeah,
where everybody got pushed online for a little while. And I'm still full-time in person. And of course, I have the bias of that, but it's treated me really well.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's funny. There was a while there where I was everything was fully online, and it was the most I have ever had to think about the communication and interpersonal side of coaching. It's like this kind of weird paradox that like because you're online now, you actually need to be doing more communication and really a good job of relating to your clients than ever before because I think there's just an inherent amount of trust and accountability that's baked into seeing somebody in person a few times a week. And when that's taken away, it's very easy for people to drift from a motivational standpoint, from an emotional standpoint. If you're not regularly checking in with them, actually doing calls with them, I can't really imagine how somebody would have an online coaching business and manage to have it be something where people hang around if you're not actually talking to them regularly.
Yeah, I think the potentially problematic model. I think there are people with big media presences who are very transparent about the amount you actually interact with them. Again, we'll use RP as an example. It's like they are using this app and you are not talking to Dr. Mike Israetel. You're not talking to Nick Shaw, but there's no pretending that that's the case. Now, you can be in their ecosystem, and boy, you actually can interact with them. They create that room there. They do a whole bunch of stuff on that. But I think we're also seeing, some people are kind of more that influencer type. They're entertainers. They've been around fitness to the point where all of a sudden they start offering some sort of coaching option, and they present it as though they're coaching you when it is very much a one-to-many cookie cutter model. And
Yeah.
oftentimes it is just simply the way it's promoted. Hell, I mean, I have a one-to-many online women's group program,
Hmm.
but there's a lot of support and structure to have people function independently, but they have access to me. I'm very responsive to them. And if they message me personally with a question, they're getting a voice or video message back. I respond to everything in the Facebook group, and it's actually worked out really well. Most of them, a lot of them are so independent that they almost never comment or post videos or whatever, but they see that I'm responding to everybody else, and they actually experience that
Yeah.
trust that I am there when they need, if they ever need. They're just pretty independent, and they love the structure of the program to follow and being a part of a community, even if they're not necessarily overly active in it. And I found that that works, and it allows me to offer it at a low cost, really, really high experience, quality experience,
Yeah.
and I'm not overwhelmed with the responses.
Yeah, I think we're at a point now where um the pendulum has kind of swung from, 6 years ago we had this like very abnormal state of affairs where there's a great coach I follow, Kier Wenham Flat, who was like, I think the way he summed it up was like basically they were just like giving people free money who were locked in their houses, and people were just throwing that at things like online fitness. And it's a scenario that hopefully is never going to materialize ever again. And I think it probably like created a very kind of like false economy around online training where,
Mm.
like people were kind of spending money that wasn't really theirs, trying this thing they had no other options other than to do, because going into a gym in person just wasn't an option. And I think a lot of people jumped into that as they saw it as like a bit of a cash cow.
Mm.
Um, and I think there's been a huge erosion of trust. I think that's the other thing with in-person training as well, that people know what they're getting to a certain extent when they're coming to see you in person. That there's the trust that, okay, you're a real human being, you're here in this space. It's unlikely the walls are just going to collapse around us. But unfortunately, there have been a lot of people who've capitalized on what looked like making an easy buck for very little work,
Mm.
and done this kind of like mass marketing online coaching thing. I mean, actually, funny enough, literally before we hopped on this call, I was having dinner with a family member who told me that they bought like a 12-week online coaching thing from a guy who's like one of the biggest UK personal trainers. And I was, surprised and disappointed to hear that, her experience was that she she didn't get to talk to him once, and every single
Mm.
time she was on a call, it was like a different coach that she had to
Mm.
kind of like start over with again and explain what was
Mm.
happening. So I think a lot of people have just gotten burned with stuff like that, and there's a lot of trust that's been eroded.
I think there are definitely people I respect who have the model where they're the face and figurehead, but it's transparent that you're going to be working with a coach within the
Yeah,
organization. And I
yeah,
think a lot of it is just how transparent it is. But your assessment of what happened, during the pandemic is probably the best I've ever heard. I really think that something key happened. Before it, we were pre-tipping point where everybody understood that online coaching was there, an option and theoretically viable, right? I think more people got to experience it. A lot of people decided this isn't what I would want to do if
yeah,
I have my choice. I think it will always be there. I think it was a bit of a bubble. It won't fully burst. It will still be a thing, but it won't see the kind of growth or um, users piling into it that we did for that brief window. But I think there's a lot of people moving into that space. There's going to be, again, a lot of competition on that lower end, like one to many model. And usually there's sort of a parasocial figurehead, talking head who's a big
hmm
content creator, big media stuff, whatever, that drives business either into, something algorithmic or into a business that has a series of coaches. And there's people who do that ethically, and then there's people who don't. But I just don't know how. and what a lot of the business mentorship, and again, like I always, when I say this, I always want to differentiate. Like my friend Jonathan Goodman, I think has done really well in the space. He was always sort of a prophet for
Yeah, I love this stuff.
saying to people, even though, funny enough, after years of, and he's very transparent about his life and what's happened, but he travels around, 4 months of the year with his family, life on the beach sort of thing. But he never promised that for coaches. He was just saying, here's a way to supplement your income and earn more. Some people excel in the online space. They have a good mentorship for that. So I endorse that. But I do think a lot of these mentors are promising something that I don't think exists, which is relatively low effort, high ticket. And if there's a lot of people pushing that stuff in the space, guess what? There just simply aren't enough consumers to actually buy that model.
Yeah, and I think it's very difficult to there's so many factors that go into somebody becoming a extremely successful online coach, and I think that there's a little bit of a an unwillingness to kind of just admit that like there is no certainty. Like there's these things that you should probably do and learn, your marketing, your sales, etc. Obviously, the service has to be excellent, but nobody can guarantee that there is some formula you put together and you're just going to be rolling in it.
And I know that the tail end of this got a little bit more, almost like fitness professional centric, but I think everybody listening will probably think about it through the lens of the way that they consume coaching as well. So hopefully it's still enlightening. Everybody can follow you at, well, it's at Kill O'Connor, but it's
Okay.
Cill, right? So yeah,
Yes,
it's the
that's
same
the
thing as
Irish.
Cillian Murphy, right? Yep.
Cillian
So
Murphy has done so much good for the general understanding of my name's pronunciation and spelling.
so at Cill O'Connor.
Yeah.
And is there anything else you want to direct people to?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm assuming your audience are probably into podcasts, so I have my own philosophy of strength. I haven't done an episode in the new year yet. I've been really bad
Mhm.
about that. I've had a lot of other stuff on my plate, but there's well over 100 episodes there. I had the pleasure of having you on, so they could listen to us chat over there.
Mhm.
And I've had some other really great people in the space as well on coaches and as was evident from the start of our chat, I'm into heavy metal and music, so I do the odd episode on stuff like that too, if that interests people.
Wonderful. I appreciate you. Thank you. This was a absolute treat. Grateful to have you on for the first time.
Humbled to be asked. Thank you very much. Anytime.